Welcome to this Sunday afternoon sutta study. The suttas that I have to discuss today is a very short chapter which contains 7 words. But however, I think we can have a fruitful conversation about this set of teachings. The one that this appears in several different versions that I'm going to show you a little bit later on, and the version that I am pointing out for our reading today is the one that's in the Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 46, starting with number 67. In Bhikkhu Sujata's translation, mendicants, when the perception of ugliness is developed and cultivated, it's very fruitful and beneficial. Dot, dot, dot. This is part of the section on the Bojjhangas, are the factors of awakening. And the sutta, the part that's submitted here, I have to cause, okay, is, it's very fruitful and beneficial. How? When a mendicant develops the perception of ugliness, together with its awakening factors of mindfulness, investigation of principles or investigation of dhammas, energy, rapture, tranquility, immersion, and equanimity, which rely on seclusion, fading away, and cessation, and ripen as letting go. I think now I'm going to show you a different screen that gives you an overview of the whole list of the 10 factors. Okay. In the sutta that we're reading is the Cessation chapter, Nirodhavagga. And the first 4 of these reflections are related to overcoming greed and attachment. Asubha is he translated as ugliness. This is often translated in or described as the sutta on the parts of the body. And the Asubha reflection is especially beneficial in overcoming sexual lust, sexual desire. We might think that, especially these days, it seems like now that I've reached older age, I notice how many other people are also older, and it may be that sexual craving is not as much of a great factor for elders, although it can be. Some of the time it can be, definitely, depending on how they spent their life. And you might think that only a monk who's dedicated to a celibate lifestyle really needs to do this work. But actually, if you think about it, there is so much suffering and unskillfulness in society, in every segment of society, because of the addiction to sex and over-sexualizing things. There was a study that found that young teenage girls, 14 or 15-year-old girls, more than 50% of them believed that they were fat, believed that a woman is judged, or a girl is judged by her good looks and not by her talent or intelligence, and had already started dieting to lose weight at age 14. It's shocking to see young girls brainwashed in that way. There's another study that said that more than 60% of adult men, adult American men, look at pornography. So much habitual addiction to sense pleasure that's expressed in terms of over-sexualized sensuality, so much drama that people have with their relationships and their love affairs and so on like that, it's a tremendous threat to stability and a tremendous block to being able to get to the first base of meditation if one has not overcome these tendencies. And so by looking at the skin in a detached way, it's not really that attractive. If you look at the head hairs separated from the head and hair floating in your soup or something, it's not something that's that attractive. And then if you go inside the body and you consider the snot that flows out of the nose and the wax that comes out of the ears and the what you get in the morning, you get a little stuff that's coming out of your eyes, and then you've got the grease that's coming out of your head, different parts of the body, and the sweat coming from your armpits, and the whatever you might cough up, and whatever is collecting in the bladder or whatever's collecting in the gut, all of those different parts of the body, and it does. It could have the effect of helping a person to overcome an addiction to sexual pleasure. That's the main reason that I say that this Asubha meditation is given. The Marana Sanya is the meditation on death, and we've been engaged in that reflection during the month of November, and actually the contemplating death and having a more detached view, having getting away from the fear of death is also getting away from the craving to stay alive, that powerful, powerful force for which anybody who feels anxious or frightened because they think that their very life is in danger, and then a person will do anything. A person will kill if they think that their life is in danger, unless they're wise and understand about karma. And as well, that Marana Sanya leads one to the reflection about dependent arising and seeing the life cycle, that rebirth, death and rebirth, death and rebirth, it actually goes together. And then rather than being frightened of death and trying to cling on to life, or being frightened of death and wanting to get a happy rebirth, or being frightened of death and doubly terrified because of our guilty conscience and we believe that we're on the way to hell, and then are so dangerous, so harmful. But then when we understand, we become disenchanted with the round of samsara, and we no longer entranced or deceived, then we're seeing the weariness and pointlessness of going on and on with this cycle of birth and death, and then become willing to let that go. The next one is patikula, which is described as a repulsion or repulsiveness with regards to ahara, and that means nutrition. In this case, it means food. So it's seeing that which is repulsive in connection with food. One of our participants this morning was mentioning how in meditation it's a very frequent thing that for that individual, if the mind wanders, the most frequent thing that the mind wanders away to, if it wanders in meditation, is it wanders to food. And somehow one could get in the habit. It's so easy to make a habit. I think the dentist encourages people to make a habit of having good dental hygiene, and they ask the patient to really, really, really make a point of brushing and flossing correctly the right number of times of the day, and doing it for 14 days. And that they say that after 14 days, it's already started to be a habit. And if they don't stop doing it, then it becomes more and more automated and very easy to do, and they don't forget about it. And so it's the same thing, like if one thinks that just daydreaming about the pleasure of food is something that doesn't do any harm, obviously it's not the same, it's not as bad as daydreaming about killing somebody, but nevertheless, that food is a tremendous drive. It is one of the greatest pleasures that a person can receive, like especially if you're hungry. And then somebody comes by with a dana, and we know that in a few minutes there will be some nutritious and well-prepared food will be offered, and whatever the low blood sugar or the tiredness or the discomfort that you feel with hunger is going to be going away. And then just even the anticipation of food is so pleasant. This comes to remind me to mention that this group of teachings is strong medicine for somebody who's perhaps ill. And but it doesn't mean that these practices of seeing the danger or seeing the negativity in our human existence or in different aspects of our human existence is supposed to be the only thing. Elsewhere in the Satipatthana, in particular in the Mahasatipatthana under the contemplation of the Dhamma, it mentions, when it explains how suffering arises, it begins by saying, the I is dear and delightful in this world. When a person delights in the I, craves the I, is attached to the I, then it's exactly that place. That's where dukkha arises, and it's where dukkha settles down. And then the I, the visible object, the I consciousness, the contact, the feeling, the perception, and the thinking, everything connected with the I and visual things, all of those things are dear and delightful and lovely in the world. But it's because of taking delight and grasping that suffering arises. Then when they come to the next section, the third noble truth, and the Buddha is speaking about the cessation of dukkha, he doesn't say the I is asubha and I feel patikula, I have the perception of repulsion towards the I. That's not what it says in that sutta. In that sutta, it repeats the same thing, that the I is dear and delightful in this world. So without negating that reality of the pleasure of the I, it says that one who does not delight, does not grasp, does not crave after the I, then suffering doesn't arise right there. Elsewhere in a sutta that I think we might talk about in 2 weeks from now, which is the Indriya Bhavana Sutta in the middle-length discourses about development of the Indriyas, it talks again about the same thing, about the way that with the senses, in that sutta it's saying that there's a pleasantness about these things and something unpleasant about them. So if you see something beautiful or if you taste something delicious, that's pleasant. But if you're doing this asubha practice, and when you look at a beautiful person of the gender that you like, and you just see a bag of different kinds of dirty liquids wrapped in a skin, then that's unpleasant, right? So, but then the one who is one in training, and in this other sutta we're going to come to it, the one who's in training, when they see that the craving and is arising with respect to the sense faculties, then they see the danger, they become like horrified and they want to get out of it. But then the one who is an arahant, who's enlightened, is able to see that which is pleasant, and able to see that which is unpleasant. They can see the disgustingness in something beautiful. They can see the beauty in something disgusting, and they can see both of them at the same time. and they dwell in equanimity. So in every case, the point of the practice is to come out of craving and to come out of aversion or hatred and to come towards the development of equanimity. So in this case, coming back to the section that we're on here, the asubha marana, the ahare patikula sanya, the unbeautiful aspect of the parts of the body, that call it contemplation of death, the contemplation of the repulsive qualities of food. And then the last one here is called sabbaloke anabhirata sanya, and that means being disappointed with this entire world. So our existence, we live in the kama world. We live in the world related to sensual desire, sense desire. It's our nature as beings, like beings made out of flesh and blood, who were born from a woman, who have this kind of body. It's the quality that we have, that our whole life is accompanied by craving, unless we learn how to come out of it. And so it's that disillusionment there that's being spoken of. Comparing the suttas to some of the others, you can see that there's at least one other sutta, if not more, that gives the perceptions in exactly the same order. This is one about greed, 237. It's unnamed. Anguttara 10.237 gives working on developing these perceptions leads to the cessation of greed, or to the understanding of greed. In this Nirodhavagga, developing these and applying the factors of awakening to these contemplations leads to awakening. There are two other suttas that in the Anguttara that just give the second group, the six, and I'm going to talk about the six in a few minutes. The six are of a more purely related to insight, not so much in the realm of overcoming greed. And then in the Sangiti Sutta, the Digha Nikaya 33, that's one that has a summary of many, many, many different teachings are summarized in these short lists. Like each verse is like a whole realm of wisdom. And that same list of the six that we're going to come to soon is given in the Sangiti Sutta and listed as perceptions that lead to the breakthrough of insight. I'm going to stop now. It will only take a couple of seconds for me to read you the first four of these reflections. Okay, so the perception of ugliness, when developed and cultivated, is very fruitful and beneficial. Asubha sanya. The perception of death, when the perception of death is developed and cultivated, very fruitful and beneficial, Maranasanya. The perception of the repulsiveness of food, that's ahare. Patikula is repulsiveness. Sanya, when developed and cultivated, is fruitful and beneficial. And then the last one in this part. The perception of dissatisfaction with the whole world. Sabaloke anabirata sanya. So anabirata, recognizing disenchantment or having a perception of non-delight. So another way of looking at the whole world in this case is that you could have the idea that within this fathom-long body, with its faculties and all the mental attributes, that the whole world is contained. So then the six senses, the five material senses and the mental sense, is sometimes described as that these things are the whole world. So it's not that the sense of disillusionment or disappointment is that you're looking out here and you're saying that world out there is so disappointing. But instead, you're looking within and looking at the characteristics of our existence as we experience it internally through the kind of faculties that we have, and becoming disillusioned. What's the purpose of this? Okay, I think I'll stop talking. I'll ask you, what do you think is the purpose of these four strong teachings that are such negative or such un-American teachings that when modern students hear about it, sometimes they file a protest, and we have to try to explain and put it in context. So I want to hear either your answer if you have one, or your question if you have one, about these first four. And if you're not careful, I'm going to call on one of our bhikkhunis. Okay, do you have an answer?
Right. Well, I mean, I think it's the end goal, I think, is the equanimity. There is the description of seeing the repulsive in the unrepulsive and the unrepulsive in the repulsive, and just sort of having the ability to have that flexibility of mind, not seeing things as being just solidly one way or another. And so these meditations, they're correctives to when we get caught up in something that's false. So if we get caught up in thinking, life is so wonderful and it's all there is and we're never going to die, and we need to be pushing back against death. Well, death is coming, and so it's a false perception if we don't see that and recognize that. And same with the bodies. It's false to think that the body is only beautiful and not ugly. It would also be false to think it's only ugly and not beautiful, but so then this meditation might not be right for somebody who had the alternative perception. And there are also meditations that are, bringing up the good and the bright. There are those joyful meditations also, and those have their role. But these ones have their role in that they're correcting something that is wrong, that is false, and that we're so deeply tied to them sometimes that we really need a shock to kind of come out of them. And these meditations can be sort of a shock to the system. But I think it is important to contextualize that, the end goal is to be able to just see it all with equanimity, not to be able to, we're not trying to hate or go into anger and the alternative there. The goal is just to be able to see truly and clearly and come out of whatever wrong perceptions we may have to begin with.
This reminds me to mention that if you take this sutta and where it fits in the chapter, immediately before this group of teachings is the meditation on breath, the Anapanasati meditation. And immediately before that, in this section of the Samyutta Nikaya, is the 4 Brahmaviharas. So, and this is all of them are in the context. Each one is supposed to be practiced together with the factors of awakening, which is inclining towards seclusion and leading to awakening. And so you get these 5 meditations that are so lovely, bright, uplifting, pleasant, inspiring, happy-making meditations, and then wanting to use those meditations as the basis for insight for liberation. But I believe that there is a danger, especially if somebody is very good at meditation, that the meditator could become addicted to the pleasure of meditation without seeing the danger. And in a case like that, a person like that actually can, if they're sensitive and intelligent, but they don't know how to take it without grasping, they could develop a grasping for those lovely and pleasant meditations, and then later when they're not in that meditation, they could experience grief and sorrow and depression because the life, while they're not sitting on a cushion meditating, is so much more difficult because they didn't know that they need to use the meditation for insight. And so it could be that the meditator who's following that program has gone too much on the side of pleasure, and then they need to see the danger in order to wake up and develop the urgency and make the effort. I'm going to call on Richard.
Thank you. The bhikkhuni that just spoke, I agree with what she was saying, that we don't want to make these things so obsessive that maybe anger or other things like that, negative emotions will arise. Sorry that I can't remember her name. It's part of my old age problem, just like I sometimes forget words. But it's very interesting because my vision of the Dharma is always very clear, even if I can't remember the words associated with it. So when I hear Buddha say something like, you got the vision of the Dharma, I can understand what he's talking about, because words are really a temporary thing, that it depends on where you're born, what language you learn, and all that kind of stuff. But that all dissipates, when you go somewhere else and take another birth somewhere else, maybe they have a different language. So, but anyways, so with that in mind, I wanted to say that this asubha that's being translated as ugly here by Bhikkhu Suzato, or foulness by Bhikkhu Bodhi, I think it means more a benign type of thing, like unattractive. So subha means attractive, asubha means non, whatever, unattractive. And that kind of takes a lot of this emotional impact out of it, and yet maintains, you can see there's a difference between things. And the same thing with the other word, patikula, translated as repulsive here. I think, yeah, Bhikkhu Bodhi also translates it as repulsive. That also can just mean unpleasant, you know, which again, you know, it takes that extra heat off. It might obsess your mind, right? And cause your mind to go into states you don't want to go in. You really want to calm your mind down. Now, there's a slight side note I want to mention here. If you notice, these are all perceptions, and those earlier sections are perceptions, and I'm not sure if later ones are. No, they go
Yeah.
up in a different direction, but sometimes this word perception in its implication in terms of the five khandhas is misunderstood. In the five khandhas is explained both by Buddha and by Sariputta that I remember in two different suttas. He says, because he's being asked, you know, what is meant by this perception. He says, perception, he says, perceptions are many and varied, he says, but in this case, we're talking about the five khandhas. When we use the word perception here, he says, like the eye perceives red, yellow, blue, and white, which is very similar to the rods and cones, you know, the way, in other words, just that basic color differentiation, and then it gets mixed together, and all the nerves come together, and that forms the khandha, the vision of everything. All those different colors put together, made together. You know, samkara, not khandha, samkara puts it all together. Okay, and but this is another type of perception here. Other than that type of perception, that's more sensual perception, or this could be more like a mana perception, perceiving thoughts in your mind, like that, as opposed to the type of perceptions from the other five senses. So, anyways, I just want to make that point because it might clarify things when people are studying Buddhism and suttas and stuff. Anyway, thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm going to give a different possibility, and that is that you've had the five previous meditations, which were very beautiful, and you had to overcome craving with respect to those beautiful subjects. And now you have these four objects of contemplation. And suppose that they really are repulsive, disgusting, and horrible. And then you need to overcome aversion. If we're a natural human being, before we've become fully enlightened, it's very possible that we will see things that stir up the strong sensation of horror, disgust, fear, and aversion. So a person can be really frightened of death. They can be really grossed out if they encounter illness. They can be disgusted if they encounter the bad behavior of the other humans, if they see how human beings are capable of so much unskillful behavior. And then, like if someone in your life is going in a very bad direction, like you're so disgusted you can't even talk to them, you can't even look at them or think about them because of repulsion. And so then this set of teachings, in a way, is what psychologists could call operant conditioning, that you take something that's really hard to look at and you just look at it very calmly, scientifically. You just examine it realistically, and you just make yourself accustomed to being able to look and see things that are difficult to look at without being swept away by negative emotions. So that way you didn't get swept away with positive emotions about love and kindness and all of those things on the previous set, and you also don't get swept away with negative emotions. Any other questions or comments about this part? Okay. Again, for those of you who are used to seeing Saket on screen, here's your in person today.
Thank you, Aya. I had a question around these practices. What about when we are dealing with people we care about? At that point, is it that like how do we just not do these at that time, or what's our approach then?
So you're thinking, for example, that like if you're with somebody and perhaps like because of illness, that there are a lot of things that are kind of gross and having to take care of that person, and are even if they're coming close to death. With all of these things, in terms of meditation practice, one possibility is to look at the thing that's the most difficult. And then the other possibility is to go to a more style of meditation where you're taking a neutral theme of meditation like the breath, and or a pleasant theme of meditation like loving kindness, and practicing that in a concentrated way, and you ignore everything else, just focus on the sign of the beautiful or a neutral object, and it gives a chance for the brain and the mind to to withdraw temporarily from being around something which is difficult or anxiety provoking, and then it's like if you didn't have a choice what to do with your mind or what to think about, then you would be a victim of any painful thing or difficult thing that happens to you, because there would be no escape. You would be like trapped in this dukkha with the tragic thing that has happened to you. And you might even have to commit suicide. I'm not recommending that. But it could have really bad consequences if you think that you have no choice. But if you discover through this practice that actually you have the power to choose what you're going to do with your mind, and to choose where you're going to place your attention, then you can intentionally direct the mind towards the kind of object that's going to be useful for where you're at right at that moment. And just knowing that you have that choice means that then you can face up to something that's terrible and painful without that kind of fear. Even doing meditation, like the next section of meditation about impermanence, and if you know about impermanence, if you really understand dukkha, and if you really understand not self, then it becomes ever so much more easy to then look at things which are otherwise very difficult to look at. But it may be that it's necessary to not be like intentionally taking a theme of meditation that's causing a lot of disturbances. I always have the idea that we shouldn't go looking for trouble in meditation. We shouldn't intentionally go down and spend our time thinking about our problems or thinking about things that are disturbing, because the part of what meditation is for is to come to calmness and stability. So you don't have to go and intentionally think about stressful things, because the stressful thoughts will come to you anyway. So, so don't choose them, but instead, take a tranquil. Especially if something is really emotionally difficult, the advice that I got was to really aim for a tranquil meditation, and then if any difficult emotions or thoughts come along, see that for what it is. See whether it's permanent or impermanent, and then try as much as you can to return to the tranquil meditation. And then even within trying for tranquility, you'll have lots of chances to look and see the things that are the most difficult that you're facing. Yeah. Okay, Corina.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Yes, what you just said reminds me of maybe another way to also look at these, and kind of a question I have. So I was thinking about when I looked at the list of 4, for me, if you didn't tell me what it was for me, it's a list of, am I spending my time wisely, or am I getting caught up in like trying to make my body beautiful, or just how great life is and enjoying it, or how wonderful the food is and make it more tasty, or you know things like
I have something to sell you. You could live to be 120.
that. So yeah, it's like a list of how am I spending my time, and especially when you gave the context of where it's placed, in this whole Samyutta Nikaya. It reminds me of the Satipatthana, and that practice in the Satipatthana where you ask yourself, well, is there this hindrance in my mind, or is there not this hindrance in my mind? Is my mind like this, or is my mind not like this? So it's kind of like, I see it more, or another way to use these things could be like, just to say, is this aversion in my mind? Is this greed in my mind? Or is there not this aversion of the body, of the world, of the food in my mind, or etc. So it also seems like something to just get to know your own patterns, and
Good.
balance yourself with. So I was going to ask you
Excellent.
about the insight, the way you use these with insight, yeah.
Uh, well, I had when I was just a brand new person in Buddhism, I had only been meditating for less than 1 year when my younger brother passed away because of AIDS after a very ugly and gross time of illness. And so I was truly traumatized at that time, with a lot of emotional upset. And I happened to take a 10-day retreat, and the advice that I just gave Saket was the advice that Bhante Rahula gave me, which is to go after, don't try to accomplish a lot, but aim for tranquil meditation. And when difficult emotions come along, look into it and find out whether or not they're permanent. And literally, I would be doing like sitting meditation or walking meditation, and some thought would come into my mind. I would think, my father this is killing my father. He's so broken up. And then the waterworks would start. I'd be like weeping and like really, really, really strongly emotional. And there was a small meditation room on the side, and I would just go in there by myself and just sit in front of the Buddha and cry again and again, like maybe many times during this 10-day retreat. But to the extent that I was able to perceive impermanence, I noticed that the most extreme intensity of the pain was not at its most extreme level for more than 15 minutes at a time. It would ease up. And then it would come back again and again, but it never lasted more than 15 minutes. And so And then at the end of 15 minutes, I was still alive. And what I came out of that retreat knowing, this was the worst thing that was ever going to happen to me in my entire life. And if I could stand it for 15 minutes, then it would not kill me. And I would be able to go on with life if I could just take the most horrible, painful thing possible in life and be able to bear it for 15 minutes. Because that was, now of course, impermanence. If you think that impermanence is happening in 15-minute increments, you wouldn't probably get a gold star as being the best meditator in the world, because impermanence is happening much faster than that. But nevertheless, so that is the aspect of it. If one is like really caught up in the pleasure and you're not able to see the danger, you may intentionally direct your mind towards this. And if one is caught up in something that stirs up those reactions, one may look to see the impermanence in it, and then do the second half of this sutta, which I think I'd like to come back to. Richard, do you have another comment to add?
Yes, you mentioned the previous Sutta 66,
Yeah.
in passing, mindfulness of breathing, and you said it's neutral. I would like to take a slightly different look at it, which is, as Buddha says, when you develop mindfulness of breathing, eventually gladness arises. Well, gladness
Right.
is not really neutral, right? And then
Yeah.
piti, when you get into the first jhana, that's not neutral, right? And then enhanced piti in the second jhana, that's not neutral, right? And then the sukha, the third, right? So it does eventually lead to equanimity.
Right.
But I think there's a way so that the breath meditation isn't thought of as a chore, right? If we approach it in the right way, we can see, hey, this is going to lead to these, wonderful experiences. Don't get stuck in them, but just know that it's not a chore. It's actually leading us, onward, like that. Anyway, it just struck me when you said that.
Thank you.
Very
That's very true, and I take your point about that. The Brahma Viharas and the breath meditation are all pleasant. I'd like to go back to the sutta now. So the next perception is the perception of impermanence. It may be interested to think now about what you mean to develop a perception. Developing that's like a bhavana. So that refers to a mental cultivation, an intentional mental training. And the idea that I have about that is that having heard about the concept from the Blessed One or through the suttas, then one may ponder and think about it in terms of what we think it signifies. And then one may look inwardly to one's own experience in the spirit of the investigation of the Dhammas. In that case, you want to actually make the test, make the experiment with your own experience. Can you see the rising and disappearing, the rising and cessation? Can you see the continuous change? Can you see impermanence? Can you face impermanence from the infinitesimal moment all up to the macrocosm of like life on this earth being destroyed? Or even the stars running out of light and becoming dead objects. So we see impermanence at all of those different time scales. So that's the second part, is having that direct experience. And from there, by simply watching and attending to impermanence, it could be perhaps when you're in a specialized atmosphere of a retreat or on the meditation cushion with no distractions, then you have a chance to experience and see something. But then when you go off the cushion and you go back into the activities and chores of everyday life, you might forget to notice impermanence. But if you learn to practice mindfulness in all the postures, to be continuously, pausing and examining, then you may be able to, like, very frequently, very often, be able to notice occasions of impermanence with so many different circumstances and situations that are happening to us all day long. And then in a kind of like a culmination, the impermanence becomes, it's almost like continuously, what everything that you look at, you're able to see it in terms of impermanence. The next teaching goes to a further level of insight, which is not a different topic of meditation, but it's a different angle on it, a different way of looking at it. And this shows how the tilakkhana, or the three marks of existence, are not three different topics, but actually like an unfolding of three ways of looking at the same thing. So the perception of suffering in impermanence is very fruitful and beneficial. So this will be, somebody was my friend before and now they're not my friend anymore. I bought something and now it's broken. I thought that thing would make me happy, but now I'm tired of it. It doesn't make me happy anymore. Even looking at the beautiful blue, we've got a lovely pure blue sky today. And when I look at the sky, it's apparent that I have floaters on the inside of my eyeballs, and so there's these big brown streaks always in the sky. Every time I look, I always see these brown streaks, the floaters. And so, like, when I was a child, I was able to see a pure blue sky, but now I can't see it anymore. This is impermanence. So we see that because of this constant change, that there's nothing here in samsara that you can cling to and rely on as being a permanent refuge, that you can find happiness by clinging to it. So that's the dukkha in impermanence, the dukkha of rebirth, of birth, death, and rebirth, is the part of the dukkha of impermanence. So anicca means impermanence. Anicce, that's the locative case. It means in impermanence, or with respect to impermanence, you can see the dukkha in it. Now, some people are deluded and they think that impermanence is beautiful. They think that, like, there's a great sunset happening, and it's like, oh, this sunset, it's only going to be here for a couple of minutes, and then it'll be gone forever. And then they feel how precious, and even the more precious it is, because it's just a moment that's there, and then it's gone. And I'm not denying that that's true, and it can seem that way. But even though it's true that the very fragility of a flower blooming, or a moment in our life which the things come together, and it's a very noticeable like that, and it seems like it's delightful because it's impermanent. But also you can't take refuge in a sunset. You can't take refuge in a flower. How much the less so could you take refuge in any other kind of property or wealth or acquisition or personal quality that you've developed, because all of those things are unstable and changing. Then then this next one is a continuation. Having the perception of not self in suffering, in dukkha. So dukkha, dukkhe, in the experience of dukkha, you have the experience of anatta, or non-self. In the Anattalakkhana Sutta, the Buddha said that if you realize that all of the sense bases and the aggregates are impermanent, and then he says, is that which is impermanent pleasant or unpleasant? And the answer is dukkha, Venerable Sir, it's unpleasant. And then he says, is that which is impermanent and suffering and of the nature of constant changing, worthy to be referred of as the self? And the answer is no, Venerable Sir. It's not worthy, it's not suitable or fitting to make such a fragile, impermanent, and unsatisfactory thing and say, this is myself. Now, I had been trained and understood that that teaching over in the Anattalakkhana Sutta is a sort of an answer to a different religious philosophical idea that the other practitioners had, where they believed that every person possesses a self, which is a subtle essence, which is eternal, unchanging, blissful, and connected to Brahma, connected to the divine element. And that their whole, they were like striving to be in touch with that blissful and eternal divine self that was somewhere within them. And the Buddha said, you can't find it. And this continuing search for something that's not to be found is just a cause of even more suffering. Another way of understanding this could be that when we experience the sharp stab of dukkha, it tends to be hurting us, actually hurting us, when the delusion about the self has come up. If we have personalized it and said, you know, poor me, this is happening to me, or that this other person or this circumstance is hurting me, and I've attributed a self to that other person. I think there's more than one person in the world that has a lot of enemies, and then their enemies like are obsessing, and they spend all day long. I know this because I looked at the internet, and all over the internet it's like this one person is causing the whole world to suffer, and the whole world is going to be terrible, all because of one person. and so that's like, it's another aspect of giving a self. But it's like it's projected, instead of like projecting internally like myself, it's being projected outside, but it's the same kind of thing. But when you see that actually there's no self there, it's just dukkha, it's just the arising of dukkha and the cessation of dukkha, and it's an impersonal process that's not in connection to a self or multiple selves, that's where we can have the breakthrough of insight. So out of the intensity of the experience of how really horrible it is to be trapped with our dukkha in combination with the delusion about the self, those two things together is really a prison cell. It's worse than a prison cell. It's a bear trap. It's painful. We're trapped. We're stuck. It really hurts. We can't get out of it. It's a dilemma. It's a quandary. And it's because of those two things together, the experience of dukkha and the belief in me, mine, and myself. But from or within, with respect, out of that experience of the intensity of dukkha, when we see the anatta sanya, the perception of non-self, then the trap opens and we're free. I'm going to pause here. So this is the three marks of existence, anicca, and then within anicca, perception of dukkha, and then within dukkha, perception of anatta, and this naturally reminds us of the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta. But I really love this anicca dukkha sanya. And this dukkha anatta sanya, it's a very different, it gives us a different way of thinking about it. Now I will ask for your comments and questions, and I might ask a different bhikkhuni to explain this part. Are you able to? What do you think? What does it bring to mind?
I have a thought. I don't know if I can coherently put it into words. I'm just thinking about how, we're so conditioned to look out at the world and, be seeking out things that are pleasurable or things that are pleasant and sort of using those things to build ourself out of and try to give ourselves some sense of security. And it's as we do that with things that are impermanent, then what comes along with it, as those things naturally decay, as everything impermanent does, then we get the dukkha and the insecurity that is just the not even the mirror, it's just the thing that just automatically is the other side of what comes with it. And so it's learning to see that process and then having faith that there is some other option, that it's not, we do that and we delude ourselves and we say okay, let me look at the pleasant and let me ignore the unpleasant part of it because I don't think that I have any other choice about any other way to make myself happy. And so it's, forcing yourselves to look at the unpleasant part and the dukkha that comes along with it and the inherent instability of the self that's built that way. But to sort of feel safe enough to do that, you have to have some trust that there is some other possibility, and that's what the Buddha is trying to show us. So you have to sort of go into that, as Venerable Kachayana said. You're not trying to bring up a lot of negative things. The ultimate intention, of course, is positive, but you have to have a little bit of faith to just sort of get yourself over that fear of looking at this thing that you've tried your whole life to not look at.
That was Venerable Tavira, and before that, the other bhikkhuni who spoke was Venerable Kachayana. I think I may return to the sutta and point out the last few contemplations in this sutta, so we be sure that we don't run out of time. I feel that these last three are, in a way, like the fruition of the practice. So it's said in the description of enlightenment that the arahant is free, and they know that they're free. So they experience nibbana, and they know that they experience nibbana. So these are like the few steps that are when the whole structure of the taints and the delusions is just in the process of collapsing. The house of cards is falling down, and your perception is so good that you can see it's falling, it's falling, it's falling, it's falling, it's falling, it's falling, it fell. Okay. So, pahana sanya, the perception of giving up, is developed and cultivated, very fruitful and beneficial. In this case, it doesn't just mean giving up coffee for Lent. It is referring to the giving up of everything conditioned. And when that happens, the next one is viraga, which is translated beautifully as dispassion, in the sense that raga has one of the meanings is lust, and then viraga is the opposite of that. I tend to also think of it in terms of the passion, in the sense like emotional reactions, and so then the emotions settle down and settle down and settle down. It may also be something that's like even stronger than that. Raga also refers to a dye or a color, and so if you put a little bit of color into a large pond, even if it's a still pond, you'll see the color is in the drop where you dropped it, but then gradually, over a little bit of time, it spreads out and spreads out and spreads out, and it becomes invisible. And so the same way, when you say that one, like, instead of saying, I am somebody and you can see me, instead it's like the experience of being nobody, and Mara, I can't see you. So it's, I think Ajahn Brahm has a book called The Art of Disappearing, and that's about viraga. So the self is disappeared, and that means that this passion doesn't arise. And then the last one in this set is, as it's given in this list, is nirodha, or cessation. And it doesn't simply mean that, I stopped worrying about one problem because I started worrying about a different problem, and so it ceased. This is referring to the cessation of dukkha that comes with the destruction of the taints and the realization of liberation. When the perception of cessation is developed and cultivated, it's very fruitful and beneficial. And here they give the refrain that applies to every one of the teachings in this whole section. When a mendicant develops the perception of cessation together with the awakening factors of mindfulness and investigation of principles or of Dhamma, energy, rapture, tranquility, immersion, and equanimity, which rely on seclusion, fading away, that's the viraga, and cessation, that's nirodha, and ripen as letting go. In this case, the earlier Pali word we had was pahana, and this is vosaga, so they're somewhat related words. So this is a cluster of phenomena that is happening together, mutually supportive, mutually developing. Seclusion, fading away, cessation, and letting go. That's how, when the perception of cessation is developed and cultivated, it's very fruitful and beneficial. When the perception of cessation is developed and cultivated, you can expect one of two results: enlightenment in this very life, or if there's something left over, non-return. So they develop this factor in this way. And then in the second statement, they get enlightenment in this very life, or if there's something left over, non-return. The perception of cessation, when developed and cultivated, leads to great benefit, great sanctuary from the yoke, great inspiration, and great ease. The word that he's translating as inspiration is samvega, which is sometimes called urgency, great spiritual urgency. When one develops these perceptions, each one of these perceptions together with the awakening factors, culminating in equanimity, which then relies on seclusion, fading away, cessation, ripeness, letting go. I'll call in Corina.
I was wondering if you could tell that story in the sutta, or I don't remember it very clearly, but something about how a nun was washing her feet before going into the Dhamma hall, and just seeing the disappearance or the water, something like that, and she had like the impermanence, and she had an insight. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I'm not sure that I can remember it very accurately. Does anybody else remember it very accurately? Which bhikkhuni that was? That was Patachara. Can you tell us more about it?
So that's the great Bhikkhuni Patachara, who, yes, that was her awakening time. She has the famous story of the great tragedy when she lost both her husband and then both her children, and then her whole, her parents and her brother, like all on the same day, and went mad and went running through the town naked until eventually she came to the Buddha, and he told her, sister, recover your senses. And she did, and she became a bhikkhuni. And then, yes, later she's practicing. She's living as a bhikkhuni. And I think in her verse in the Therigatha it says, why have I not already had the fruits of my practice? I'm not lazy, I'm diligent, others have, why not me? And then she's going and washing her feet. I think not before the Dhamma hall, but before going into her kuti. She pours the water on her feet and sees the little rivulets of water fading into the earth. I think the commentary says that she had the reflection that time that, one of the rivulets goes a certain distance, a longer distance, and one is shorter, and one is very short. And she compares that to the life of her husband and the life of her two children, the length of time. That's in the commentary, not in the original text. But she sees the water going into the earth, and then she goes into her kuti, and she has a lamp, and she puts out the lamp, and that's when she wakes up.
And isn't it a perception of impermanence?
Yes.
And it's not, there's two parts. There's one style of impermanence is one thing after another. And the other style of impermanence is there is cessation and there's not any necessity for the next thing to arise. It's just allowed to stop. Okay. I want to invite those who are more quiet. If you have a question or a comment to give, to please put your hand up. And in the meantime, I shall bring in Richard again.
Thank you, Aya. I just want to go back and visit the 71, 72, 73 impermanence, suffering, dukkha, and non-self. So when Buddha is talking about atta, it's very important to understand that, you know, it may be translating the word as self, but in terms of Indian thought, atta has some additional meanings that you have to understand, and that's why the Buddha's argument works. So atta is supposed to be a permanence. So that's why he points out, well, is the body permanent or impermanent? Or is, you know, a sense experience permanent or impermanent? You know, he points out things about the khandhas, about your senses, you know, which are a subset of the khandhas and things like that. That's why his argument works. He's saying these are not self because it doesn't meet the definition. If self, like we kind of use it talking about our bodies and stuff, you know, is the way that everybody understood it, he would just sit there and say, well, why is he saying that strange thing? You know, what does that got to do with anything? No, it has a very specific, when he's saying atta, not, you know, in terms of these temporary manifestations that come and go, is not self. And that's why he then says, okay, so if something comes and goes, like you love something and it goes away, that's going to cause dukkha, right? So that's how dukkha, the central theme of his whole teaching, comes in, right? Because what you're thinking of as atta or other people's attas, right, are not atta. So therefore, you know, it has this impermanence quality, and that's going to lead to dukkha, which I prefer to translate as bad results, but because that includes the word suffering in it. Those all those things are included in there, right? And therefore, he says, since it doesn't meet the definition, then it's non-self, it's anatta, all right? And then he'll go on to explain this, and by saying, you know, is the body permanent or impermanent? It's impermanent. Does that lead to, you know, sukha, right? Good results, or dukkha, bad results? Bad results, right? So is it fit to be thought of as a self? No, it doesn't meet the definition. Not only that, but it causes this problem, which is the problem that Buddha's, his fundamental problem that he says, you know, then as now, you know, what I teach. In other words, his teaching was always consistent. Some people translate the only thing I teach. It's not the only thing I teach. He's saying I've been consistent the whole time. Then as now, I keep explaining this point. You know, suffering and the way to cessation of suffering, the way to end it. Anyways, that's just my view, but might be helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For listening.
I almost missed it. There was a comment that came in on the chat, which I want to acknowledge, which is the idea that, for example, if you have a tumor or a cancer, and the surgeon cuts it out, in a very natural and intuitive sense, apart from Indian philosophy, it's very easy to see that the tumor is not me, so I'm happy to have it go. And so then when we see that everything conditioned as a tumor, a dart, a poison, a suffering, and then all of it is not me, and we're willing to let it all go. So that's another way that the logic could work, the interplay of this awakening of like accepting and really seeing how it really is about dukkha, and then being able to let something not be the self, whether in the technical sense of Indian spirituality and their developed way of thinking about that, or in a more ordinary and commonplace ways. There is a certain way in which the Indian philosophers were not different than us. They were also human beings, and they were trying to look deeply into human experience. So there are some similarities and parallels. The different schools of thought developed that accord with our ordinary ways of thinking and experiencing things. So I don't. It is certainly true what Richard was saying before about the special meaning of the self, especially as it's explained in the Anatalakana Sutta. But it's also true that if we take the ordinary commonplace experience of that there's a self, and like I'm the person who's like this, I have this job, I'm supposed to be giving the Dhamma talk, so it's my job to give this Dhamma talk. and so this ordinary practical operating sense of the self, but it all is fraught with danger of leading to all kind of suffering if there's identification. I said, "This is my talk. Why are you interrupting my talk? Why is somebody falling asleep during my talk?" And so in that way, just like an ordinary practical psychology of what is me and mine can very quickly fall over the cliff into being a cause of a suffering. And conversely, if we are able to let go of everything conditioned and say that none of it is mine, none of it is me, then we've got the chance to awaken. So I think that's enough for now. I've gone only 10 minutes over. I see that's maybe enough for now. I can pay respects to the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha.
Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami. Supatipanno Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho Sanghang Namami.
Okay, thank you everybody for your patient sharing and for your practice.
Thank you for hosting.
Okay.
Mm.